Emotional boundaries and self-respect are often spoken about in books, therapy sessions, and inspirational talks, but their true significance only becomes visible when life forces us into situations that test the very core of our identity. In families especially, where love, duty, expectation, and history mix into something both powerful and complicated, emotional boundaries are not merely a tool for protection, they are a lifeline. When family relationships cross into disrespect or entitlement, maintaining emotional boundaries becomes essential. Loving someone does not mean tolerating mistreatment, and self-respect must remain at the center of every decision. Understanding this deeply requires looking at how love and obligation have been taught to us, how sacrifice has been idealized, and how self-worth is often confused with how much we can endure. In many households, especially those shaped by cultural expectations and generational norms, the idea of love is closely tied to giving, providing, and prioritizing the needs of others above our own. Parents are encouraged to sacrifice endlessly, to hold their children above themselves, to absorb hurt without explanation, all in the name of love. But the truth is that love without boundaries does not create stronger families. It creates distorted relationships where one person carries far more responsibility than is healthy. Emotional boundaries are not walls meant to keep others out. They are guidelines that help us understand where our emotional responsibility ends and someone else's begins. They allow love to exist without suffocation, without fear, and without manipulation. When someone crosses those boundaries, when they act with entitlement, when they speak with disrespect, or when they assume they have unrestricted access to your time, your energy, or your sacrifices, it signals that something important has been lost in translation. Family love is often assumed to be automatic and unconditional, but unconditional love is not the same as unconditional tolerance. Parents, especially, have been conditioned to believe that enduring disrespect is simply part of the role. Society tells mothers and fathers that they must continue giving, no matter how they're treated, and that stepping back or saying no is selfish, or unloving, or a betrayal. But there is nothing unloving about expecting to be treated with dignity. There is nothing disrespectful about requesting respect. When emotional boundaries are weak or non-existent, relationships drift into patterns where one person feels entitled to take and the other feels obligated to give. This dynamic becomes fertile ground for resentment, disappointment, and emotional exhaustion. It teaches the giver that their worth lies in silence and sacrifice. It teaches the taker that love is measured by what they can demand, not what they can contribute. And for parents, especially in their later years, the consequences of these patterns can be profound. Many discover that the years of giving, protecting, and sacrificing have created not gratitude, but entitlement. The painful truth is that children raised without boundaries often grow into adults who believe they can treat their parents however they wish, because the parent has always said yes, always forgiven, always stepped aside, always placed the child's emotional comfort above their own. To rebuild emotional boundaries after years of imbalance is one of the most courageous acts a person can undertake. It begins with acknowledging the reality that love cannot sustain itself where there is consistent disrespect. It requires a willingness to sit with uncomfortable truths, such as the recognition that someone you love dearly may not currently have the capacity to treat you with the respect you deserve. It means understanding that protecting your peace is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of survival. Emotional boundaries serve as a guide for what you will and will not accept. They are the voice that says, "I love you, but I will not allow you to harm me. I care for you, but I will not abandon myself." These boundaries are not punishment, they are protection. Protection of the heart, the dignity, the identity you have built over years of hardship and growth. Self-respect is intimately connected to emotional boundaries. Without self-respect, boundaries collapse easily. When someone you love raises their voice at you, and you say nothing because you don't want to create conflict, your boundary erodes. When someone makes a demand that violates your comfort or values, and you comply because you fear losing the relationship, your self-respect grows weak. Over time, small concessions build into large sacrifices. You begin to feel invisible in your own life, a background character in someone else's story. You begin to believe that your needs are burdens, your feelings are irrelevant, your voice is inconvenient. But there comes a moment in every person's life when the silence becomes too heavy, when the cost of pleasing others becomes too high, when the pain of being unseen becomes louder than the fear of being alone. That moment is the birthplace of self-respect. Self-respect is not arrogance, nor is it defiance. It is the quiet acknowledgement that your life has value, that your emotions matter, that your time, your energy, and your peace are sacred. It is the decision to treat yourself with the same compassion you offer others. It is the realization that being a parent, or a sibling, a child, a partner, a friend, does not mean your self-worth is negotiable. Self-respect teaches us that love must begin within, not outwardly. Only when you respect yourself can you teach others how to treat you. Only when you hold your boundaries firmly can you raise the standard of the relationships around you. But implementing boundaries in a family setting is often met with resistance. People who have benefited from your lack of boundaries will be the first to object when you set them. They may accuse you of being selfish, dramatic, or uncaring. They may guilt-trip you with phrases like, "After everything I've done for you," or "Family doesn't say no," or "You're supposed to support me no matter what." But support does not mean self-sacrifice. Love does not require losing yourself. Boundaries do not reject the relationship. They redefine it so that both people can stand in balance rather than one carrying the weight of both. In many families, boundary setting is interpreted as disrespect, especially in cultures where authority, hierarchy, and tradition shape how relationships function. But boundaries are not disrespect, they are clarity, they are honesty. They prevent resentment from taking root and poisoning the relationship from within. They allow both individuals to take responsibility for their actions. They foster accountability, growth, and mutual understanding. Without boundaries, relationships remain stuck in cycles of hurt that repeat across generations. Emotional boundaries also teach something profoundly important, that other people's reactions are not your responsibility. You are responsible only for your choices, not for how someone chooses to interpret them. If someone responds to your boundary with anger, manipulation, or coldness, it does not mean your boundary was wrong. It means the relationship depended on your compliance rather than mutual respect. It means that person valued the benefits of your silence more than the health of the connection. It means your boundary revealed the truth that was already there. When self-respect becomes the foundation of your decisions, the quality of your life transforms. You no longer act out of fear or obligation. You no longer feel guilty for prioritizing your peace. You no longer chase validation from people who refuse to offer it. Instead, you create relationships based on reciprocity and genuine care. You learn to measure love not by how much you sacrifice, but by how well you are treated. You begin to surround yourself with people who appreciate your presence instead of demanding your compliance. Emotional boundaries are not built overnight. They are developed through repeated acts of courage. Courage to say no. Courage to walk away from conversations that disrespect you. Courage to express your needs without apology. Courage to choose yourself even when others don't understand. Courage to let people be disappointed rather than betray your own heart. Courage to believe that you deserve kindness, even from those closest to you, especially from those closest to you. Self-respect grows each time you choose yourself. It grows when you refuse to respond to disrespect. It grows when you calmly state your limits. It grows when you protect your energy from manipulation or entitlement. It grows when you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. It grows when you acknowledge that you are no longer willing to shrink so others can feel comfortable. Many people struggle with guilt when setting boundaries, especially with their children. Parents often feel torn between wanting to maintain a relationship and wanting to protect their emotional well-being. But boundaries do not sever connections. They strengthen them. They teach the child, whether young or grown, that respect flows in both directions. they demonstrate that love is not a one-way street. They show that maturity requires more than receiving. It requires giving back, acknowledging others' feelings, and treating people with dignity. In some cases, the absence of boundaries creates situations where adult children feel entitled to their parents' resources, time, or property. They may believe they have a right to make demands simply because of their biological connection. But entitlement is not love, and love is not ownership. A healthy parent-child relationship is built on gratitude, not on expectation. It is built on respect, not on pressure. It is built on mutual care, not on manipulation. And when a child forgets this, a boundary becomes not just necessary, but essential for restoring balance. Emotional boundaries also help protect older adults from exploitation, emotional strain, and the erosion of self-worth. They remind us that age does not diminish our right to be treated respectfully. They reinforce that after a lifetime of giving, one deserves peace, not additional burdens. They empower individuals to navigate family dynamics with wisdom rather than fear, clarity rather than confusion, and strength rather than guilt. Learning to maintain emotional boundaries is a lifelong journey. It requires self-awareness, honesty, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. It requires unlearning patterns that were taught in childhood and replacing them with healthier habits. It requires redefining what love means, not as endless sacrifice, but as mutual respect. It requires accepting that sometimes the people you love most will not understand your boundaries, and that is okay. Boundaries are not meant to control others. They are meant to protect you. Ultimately, emotional boundaries and self-respect are inseparable. Together, they form the backbone of a healthy, fulfilling life. They allow you to engage in relationships without losing yourself. They give you the power to walk away from situations that drain your spirit. They help you recognize when love has become unhealthy, imbalanced, or harmful. They guide you toward connections that nourish your soul rather than deplete it. They teach others how to treat you by showing how you treat yourself. And perhaps most importantly, they remind you that even in the face of disrespect, betrayal, or entitlement, you are worthy of love that honors you. You deserve relationships that see you, hear you, and value you. You deserve to live with dignity, peace, and emotional freedom. Boundaries may be challenging to set, but they are the most powerful expression of self-respect. They are a declaration that your heart is not a place where others can enter and exit freely without regard. It is a home, and like any home, it requires doors, locks, and the wisdom to decide who is allowed inside. Boundaries are not barriers. They are the architecture of emotional safety, and self-respect is the foundation upon which that architecture stands. Many parents feel obligated to sacrifice endlessly for their children, believing love must equal giving. But unconditional love does not require unconditional access, especially to your stability, property, or dignity. This belief, deeply embedded in many cultures and passed down through generations, shapes not only how parents behave but also how children grow to understand relationships, responsibility, and entitlement. The generational mindset that equates parental love with limitless sacrifice has been praised as noble, virtuous, and selfless. Yet, beneath its surface lies a quiet burden, one that grows heavier as the years pass, especially when children become adults who unconsciously carry forward assumptions that were never corrected, questioned, or challenged. The illusion of obligation begins in childhood, but it is not created by children. It is created by the stories we tell as families. Stories about how parents must give without resting. Stories about how a good mother or father never says no. Stories about how children should always be prioritized regardless of the parent's emotional, financial, or physical state. These stories feel warm, heroic even, because they come wrapped in the language of love. But over time, they form an invisible contract, one where the parent is obligated to carry, to provide, to bend, to absorb, to protect, and to sacrifice, even when it costs them their peace, their health, and sometimes their sense of identity. What is more difficult is that children raised in this environment do not always see the sacrifices, they see the outcome. They seek comfort, security, support, or opportunity, but not the exhaustion behind it. Without boundaries, they interpret effort as expectation and sacrifice as standard. They grow not understanding that every act of giving came with a cost. The generational mindset that parents must carry everything for their children is often praised publicly but suffered privately. Many parents who feel obligated to give endlessly rarely admit they are tired. They hide their fatigue behind smiles, silence, or cultural duty. They pretend giving is easy because society applauds the image of the tireless parent. Even when they feel taken for granted, they swallow their resentment because expressing it feels like betrayal. And so they continue giving more and more and more until the line between love and obligation becomes so blurred that neither parent nor child recognizes where one ends and the other begins. But this illusion of obligation is dangerous because it quietly erases the parent's humanity. It treats them not as individuals with needs, limits, or rights, but as a permanent resource. A well that never runs dry, a foundation that never cracks, a shield that never weakens, a wallet that never empties, a heart that never breaks. And when a parent believes this illusion long enough, they begin to measure their worth not by who they are, but by how much they can give. This is why so many parents continue sacrificing even when it hurts them. They believe that saying no makes them selfish. They believe that protecting their boundaries makes them uncaring. They believe that prioritizing their dignity is equal to abandoning their child. But none of these beliefs are true. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional sacrifice. It does not mean unconditional access to your resources, your time, your energy, or your property. And it certainly does not mean allowing disrespect, manipulation, or entitlement to flourish. Yet for many, this understanding only comes later in life, often after experiencing a moment so hurtful that it forces them to confront the imbalance they spent decades avoiding. These moments, being excluded, being yelled at, being taken advantage of, or being pressured for money or property, become emotional mirrors. They reflect years of unspoken expectations and reveal a truth that is as painful as it is necessary, that love without boundaries becomes a breeding ground for entitlement. The illusion of obligation does not start intentionally. It begins with love, with protection, with wanting to give children more than what you had. But somewhere along the way, the line shifts. Children begin to expect what was once a gift. Parents fear saying no. Guilt replaces boundaries. Gratitude is replaced with assumption. And the cycle continues, generation after generation, until someone is brave enough to question it. Breaking this cycle requires honesty, sometimes brutal honesty. It requires acknowledging that parents are not endless providers and children are not entitled recipients. It requires teaching children the value of mutual respect, the importance of effort, and the meaning of responsibility. And most importantly, it requires reframing love not as sacrifice but as partnership. Many adults today have grown up with parents who never said no. They grew up protected from consequences, shielded from struggle, provided for even when resources were stretched thin. And while these acts came from love, they sometimes unintentionally taught the wrong lessons. Instead of learning gratitude, they learned expectation. Instead of learning independence, they learned dependence. Instead of learning appreciation, they learned entitlement. When these children become adults, they may not understand why their parents suddenly want boundaries. Because for years, the parent's love was demonstrated through yes. So when the parent finally says no, the adult child interprets it as rejection, betrayal, or withholding. This creates conflict, not because the boundary is wrong, but because the pattern was never corrected earlier. And this is why so many parents feel trapped. They want to set boundaries, but they fear the backlash. They fear disappointing their children. They fear being judged. They fear being misunderstood. But the truth is, boundaries that are delayed only become more painful later. Teaching responsibility when a child is 5 is easier than teaching it at 25. Teaching gratitude when a child is young is easier than trying to force it in adulthood. The longer parents wait to correct entitlement, the stronger that entitlement becomes. To break the generational illusion of obligation, parents must learn to give from love, not from fear. Many parents give out of fear. Fear of conflict, fear of guilt, fear of disappointing their children, fear of not being seen as good enough. But giving from fear creates imbalance. Giving from fear creates resentment. Giving from fear teaches children that love is owed, not earned. And when parents give out of fear for too long, they lose the ability to say no. They lose the ability to protect their own lives. They lose the ability to honor their own boundaries. Unconditional love is powerful, but it has been misunderstood. It has been turned into a tool for self-neglect. True unconditional love is not about giving everything. It is about being present, supportive, caring, and honest. It is about teaching resilience, responsibility, empathy, and independence. It is about guiding children to become adults who respect both themselves and others. Unconditional love at its healthiest empowers both parent and child. It nurtures without suffocating. It supports without enabling. It provides without depleting. It teaches without controlling. And most importantly, it respects the humanity of both. Children raised with healthy boundaries develop a different mindset. They understand that their parents' resources are not theirs to demand. They treat their parents' sacrifices as acts of love, not obligations. They appreciate rather than expect. They ask rather than assume. They give back rather than only take. They grow into adults who treat their parents with dignity. And this is one of the greatest gifts any parent can give. Not endless sacrifice, but balanced love. The generational mindset that glorifies sacrifice often fails to acknowledge its consequences. It creates silent suffering. It creates emotional burnout. It creates strained relationships. It creates guilt-based bonds rather than authentic connections. And sometimes, it creates situations where children feel comfortable crossing lines they never should have crossed. This is where property, assets, and financial stability become complicated. When a parent has sacrificed endlessly, when they have given everything without setting limits, some children begin to see their parents' belongings as naturally theirs. The parent's home, savings, land, or retirement fund becomes something they expect rather than something they respect. They begin to believe they have a right to it. They forget it is not owed. They forget the years of work behind it. They forget that those resources often represent a lifetime of sacrifices. This is why emotional boundaries and financial boundaries are deeply connected. Protecting your property is not greed. Protecting your savings is not selfishness. Protecting your stability is not betrayal. It is wisdom. It is responsibility. It is dignity. A parent's property does not become a child's entitlement simply because of biology. Love does not mean surrendering everything you have worked for. Children are not entitled to their parents' assets. They are entitled to respect, care, guidance, and love. Everything else is a privilege, not a right. And understanding this distinction is essential for healthy family relationships. Breaking the generational illusion of obligation does not mean loving your children less. It means loving them correctly. It means teaching them to stand on their own. It means teaching them gratitude. It means teaching them that relationships are earned through respect, not demanded through entitlement. It means saying no when needed. It means protecting your peace, your stability, and your dignity. And it means recognizing that parenthood does not erase personhood. Love that demands self-erasure is not love, it is imbalance. Love that requires suffering is not noble, it is unhealthy. Love that refuses boundaries is not unconditional, it is unsustainable. The most loving parents are the ones who teach their children both compassion and accountability. The most responsible children are the ones who understand sacrifice without exploiting it. And the healthiest families are built not on duty, but on mutual respect. The generational mindset must evolve. It is time to redefine what it means to be a good parent, not through endless sacrifice, but through balanced love. Not through giving everything, but through teaching values. Not through carrying the family alone, but through guiding everyone to carry themselves. and it is time for parents to understand that their worth is not defined by how much they give. Their worth is defined by who they are, their wisdom, their experiences, their resilience, their heart. Parents are not obligated to destroy themselves for their children. They are obligated to guide, nurture, and support, but also to live, rest, and protect themselves. When parents release the illusion of obligation, something beautiful happens. Relationships become more authentic, children grow more responsible, families grow stronger, and the parent finally breathes, not out of exhaustion but out of freedom. Because love rooted in respect is far more powerful than love rooted in sacrifice. And when parents choose dignity alongside love, they not only honor themselves, they teach their children to do the same. Understood? I will expand the keynote as fully as possible in one message, in the same educational, reflective, motivational style. I will make it long, detailed, deep, continuous, with no headings, exactly as you requested. If you want the remaining length after this, I can continue in part 2, part 3, etc. until we reach your exact 6,950 word target. The role of accountability in family dynamics is often misunderstood, yet it sits at the heart of every healthy relationship. When a loved one acts from entitlement, manipulation, or emotional immaturity, allowing the behavior to continue only deepens the pattern. Enabling may feel easier in the moment because it avoids conflict, guilt, or confrontation, but in the long term, it nurtures dysfunction. Holding firm, calm boundaries is an act of accountability that teaches more than any lecture ever could. Accountability is not about punishment, it is about clarity. It is the quiet, steady act of saying, I see what is happening, and I will not participate in what harms me or harms you. In families where emotions run deep and history runs even deeper, accountability becomes a form of love, often the most necessary and often the most difficult. Families carry patterns. Some are beautiful: generosity, loyalty, affection, support. Others are painful: avoidance, guilt, manipulation, silence, entitlement, resentment. These patterns do not form overnight. They are woven across years, shaped by past experiences, cultural expectations, personality differences, and unspoken agreements. When a member of the family repeatedly acts from entitlement or manipulation, such as demanding things without respect, ignoring boundaries, or using emotional tactics to get their way, the behavior does not continue because it is strong. It continues because it is not challenged. Every time someone looks away instead of addressing the harm, the pattern grows roots. Every time someone comforts instead of confronting, the pattern becomes stronger. Every time a boundary is ignored and the parent shrugs it off because it's not worth the fight, the entitlement learns that its behavior has no consequences. This is how manipulation becomes habit. This is how disrespect becomes normalized. This is how families end up trapped in cycles where one person feels free to take and the other feels obligated to give. Accountability is the key that stops this cycle and redirects it toward healthier ground. But accountability in families is complicated. Unlike friendships or professional relationships, family bonds come with emotional weight. You do not want to hurt someone you love. You do not want to push them away. You do not want them to feel rejected. So you tell yourself, it's easier to stay silent, easier to give in, easier to tolerate. Yet silence is not neutral. It communicates permission. When someone treats you poorly and you say nothing, the absence of consequence becomes a lesson. They learn that your limits are flexible, that your needs are secondary, that your discomfort is a price you are willing to pay to maintain peace. But peace built on silence is not peace, it is suppression. And suppressed relationships eventually erupt. Holding someone accountable does not mean attacking them, humiliating them, or cutting them out. Accountability is measured in calm consistency. It is the steady reminder that relationships have responsibilities. It is the choice to honor yourself enough to say, this behavior is not acceptable, and I will not support it. It is the understanding that every action has a response, and every choice has a consequence, not a punishment, but a natural outcome. When someone fails to treat you with respect, the natural outcome is that you create distance. When someone manipulates, the natural outcome is that you step back. When someone demands what they have no right to demand, the natural outcome is that you decline. These responses are not revenge, they are healthy boundaries rooted in accountability. People often assume that accountability will break the relationship. In truth, lack of accountability is what breaks relationships slowly and silently. When harmful behaviors are ignored, resentment grows. When disrespect goes unchallenged, trust erodes. When manipulation is tolerated, safety disappears. The relationship might remain intact on the surface, but underneath, the foundation crumbles. Accountability prevents that erosion. It may cause temporary discomfort, yes, but temporary discomfort is always better than long-term destruction. In family dynamics, especially between parents and adult children, accountability plays a unique role. Parents often struggle to hold their adult children accountable because they still see them as young. They remember their vulnerability, their dependence, their smallness. But accountability must grow as the child grows. A child who is never taught responsibility becomes an adult who harms without realizing it. And an adult who harms without consequence becomes someone who sees relationships not as mutual connections, but as opportunities for control. Entitlement thrives in environments without accountability. When someone constantly receives without giving, demands without gratitude, or expects without understanding, it is because they have not learned the balance that healthy relationships require. Accountability teaches that balance. It teaches empathy by allowing the person to feel the natural consequences of their choices. It teaches responsibility by refusing to clean up their emotional or behavioral messes. It teaches maturity by reminding them that love is not a tool they can use for leverage. Accountability is not delivered through shouting, arguments, or emotional explosions. It is delivered through quiet, unwavering consistency. A boundary stated once with clarity is far more powerful than years of screaming or emotional outbursts. Accountability says, "I will not argue with you. I will simply act according to the limits I have set." This kind of calm firmness is disarming. It is difficult to manipulate someone who refuses to participate in emotional chaos. It is difficult to guilt-trip someone who responds with clarity instead of defensiveness. It is difficult to continue entitlement when the pattern no longer works. When a parent or family member finally holds someone accountable, it often surprises the other person. They are used to the old dynamic, where tears could change decisions, anger could intimidate, guilt could soften the boundary, or silence could buy time. When those strategies fail, the person acting from entitlement may escalate. They may lash out, accuse, or try to regain control by criticizing the boundary itself. They may claim the parent is being difficult, cold, selfish, or unfair. This reaction is not a sign that the boundary is wrong, it is a sign that the boundary is working. Entitlement resists accountability because accountability removes its power. Accountability also requires emotional strength from the person imposing it. They must accept that their loved one might initially be unhappy. They must accept that the relationship may feel strained for a while. They must accept that short-term discomfort is necessary for long-term health. This emotional strength does not come easily. It is built through self-respect, through experience, through reflection, and through the understanding that protecting oneself is not a betrayal. It is a necessity. One of the most important lessons in family dynamics is that accountability flows both ways. If a parent expects their child to behave respectfully, the parent must also behave respectfully. If a parent wants honesty, they must model honesty. If a parent wants boundaries to be honored, they must honor boundaries themselves. Accountability is not a tool wielded against someone, it is a standard upheld by everyone. But when someone repeatedly violates that standard, especially through manipulation, entitlement, or disrespect, the responsibility shifts. The one being harmed must step forward with their boundary. Lectures rarely work because entitlement is not corrected through words. Entitlement is corrected through experience. When someone learns that their words, demands, or behavior no longer have power. They must adjust, they must change, they must grow. This is the purpose of accountability, to push the relationship toward growth. Without accountability, people stay emotionally young. They continue using childish tactics to get their way: tantrums, guilt, avoidance, silent treatment, demands. But accountability teaches adulthood. It teaches emotional intelligence. It guides the person toward becoming someone who respects others and contributes to the relationship, rather than someone who only takes. Some families avoid accountability because they believe confronting issues will create distance. In reality, accountability is what creates closeness. When both individuals feel safe, respected, and valued, the relationship becomes stronger. When boundaries are honored, trust flourishes. When expectations are clear, misunderstandings decrease. When both parties feel responsible for their behavior, resentment dissolves. This is what healthy family dynamics look like. Not one person bending endlessly, but both people meeting each other with respect, awareness, and responsibility. In situations where a family member uses manipulation, such as guilt, anger, silence, or pressure, to get what they want, accountability becomes crucial. Manipulation works only when the other person responds. When the person being targeted no longer reacts emotionally, but instead responds with calm clarity, the manipulative strategy loses its effectiveness. Manipulation cannot survive in an environment where boundaries are respected. Entitlement cannot grow when responsibility is expected, and harmful patterns cannot thrive when consistency is met with consistency. Holding someone accountable also shows them something profound: their choices matter. In families where accountability is avoided, the person may never fully understand the weight of their actions, because no one shows them the consequences. But when consequences appear, such as distance, calm refusal, or loss of privileges, they are forced to face themselves. They are forced to reflect. They are forced to reconsider their behavior. This is not punishment, it is education. Healthy family dynamics require education, not enforcement. Accountability teaches, not controls. It is also important to understand that accountability is not cruel. It is kinder than enabling. Enabling protects comfort at the expense of growth. Accountability protects growth at the expense of temporary comfort. The parent who sets a boundary is not pushing their child away. They are pushing the unhealthy behavior away. They are drawing a line that says, "I love you, but I refuse to betray myself in the process." This is love with integrity. This is love with wisdom. This is love with strength. Many parents fear setting boundaries because they believe their child might leave, pull away, or become distant. But a relationship that requires you to abandon your dignity to keep it is already broken. A relationship that cannot survive boundaries is not a relationship. It is dependency. True connection can withstand boundaries. True love respects limits. True family bonds deepen when each person is held accountable for their actions. Accountability does not push people away, it filters out harmful behavior so that the genuine parts of the relationship can thrive. And when accountability is finally established, something transformative happens. The person who once acted from entitlement begins to confront themselves. They begin to feel the difference between manipulation and communication, between demand and request, between expectation and appreciation. Over time, accountability helps them mature. It teaches them empathy because they begin to understand how their behavior affects others. It teaches them responsibility because they can no longer rely on emotional shortcuts. It teaches them respect because they witness respect being modeled with consistency. Families that embrace accountability evolve. They break generational cycles of guilt-based relationships. They replace silence with conversation. They replace manipulation with clarity. They replace entitlement with gratitude. They replace control with cooperation. And for the parent, this shift brings peace, a peace that comes from choosing self-respect over self-sacrifice, a peace that comes from knowing you are teaching the right lessons, even if they are hard. A peace that comes from finally standing up for yourself without losing your compassion. accountability is not harsh. It is humane. It gives both people a chance to grow. It gives the relationship a chance to heal. It gives the family a chance to be healthier than the generations before it. And for the person being held accountable, it gives them an opportunity to rise into a better version of themselves. One capable of love that is mature, balanced, and respectful. Being excluded or disrespected by your own family creates a wound that is unlike any other. It is not the kind of pain that simply stings and fades. It is the kind that rearranges something inside you. It forces you to look closely at the pieces of your life, your relationships, your beliefs about love, and the way you have been showing up for others. Betrayal from someone close feels like your entire emotional foundation has been pulled from beneath you, leaving you confused, unsteady, and questioning where you belong. But as painful as it is, this type of rupture can become a turning point, an unexpected doorway into reclaiming your personal power and rewriting how you allow yourself to be treated. When betrayal comes from a family member, especially someone you deeply trusted or nurtured, it shakes more than the moment. It shakes the narrative you have built about who you are within the family system. It confronts you with the frightening possibility that perhaps the love you gave so freely was not understood in the way you intended. It makes you wonder whether you misread the relationship, whether the bond was as reciprocal as you always hoped, or whether you simply overlooked signs because you believed that family, by default, means loyalty. Yet one of the hardest truths to accept is that family ties, while deeply meaningful, do not guarantee emotional safety. Blood can create closeness, but it cannot ensure respect, empathy, or accountability. In the aftermath of betrayal, many people fall into the trap of self-blame. They replay the moment endlessly, analyzing their words, behaviors, or past decisions, searching for a way to make sense of the hurt. The mind tries to reconstruct the timeline to find the exact point where the relationship cracked, hoping that understanding the why will somehow make the pain less sharp. But often the betrayal is not a reflection of your failure. It is a reflection of someone else's unprocessed emotions, unresolved insecurities, or learned patterns of entitlement. It is the result of their internal conflicts, not your inadequacy. That realization alone can begin to restore a sense of power because it reframes the betrayal as something that happened to you, not something you caused. Reclaiming personal power does not happen in a single decisive moment. It unfolds slowly through a series of subtle internal shifts. It begins with the decision to stop explaining away someone else's hurtful behavior. It begins when you acknowledge, without minimizing, that what happened was wrong. It continues when you start observing the emotional patterns that kept you tied to the relationship even when it was harming you. Patterns like guilt, obligation, fear of being seen as unloving, or the desire to keep the peace at any cost. Sometimes the hardest step is simply admitting that your heart had been carrying more weight than it should have. One profound transformation that betrayal brings is the realization that love without self-respect is a cage rather than a connection. When you love others, you naturally want to support them, understand them, and stand by them. But when that love begins to require your silence, your dignity, or your sense of worth, it becomes a sacrifice that slowly erodes your identity. Betrayal forces you to confront whether you have been giving from a place of genuine love or from a place of fear. Fear of losing relationships, fear of conflict, fear of being alone, or fear of being misunderstood. Once you recognize that your self-worth has taken a back seat to maintain the relationship, you begin to understand the necessity of reclaiming your power. Personal power is not about control over others. It is about authority over yourself. It is the ability to honor your own needs, boundaries, and values, even when others do not. In the wake of betrayal, reclaiming this power means you stop allowing the person who hurt you to dictate your emotional narrative. You stop waiting for them to validate your feelings or acknowledge the pain they caused. You stop centering the relationship around their actions and instead shift your focus to your own healing. This shift does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop abandoning yourself in the process of caring. Reclaiming your power also involves redefining what healthy love looks like. For many people, especially those who grew up in environments where love was conditional, inconsistent, or emotionally confusing, betrayal in adulthood reactivates old wounds. It mirrors earlier experiences of neglect, exclusion, or emotional abandonment. But this mirroring can be a powerful teacher. It helps you recognize outdated patterns, like overgiving, people-pleasing, or tolerating disrespect because you believe conflict is more dangerous than disappointment. The betrayal becomes the catalyst that makes you question these internalized beliefs and begin building new ones. Healthy love is rooted in mutual respect, emotional reciprocity, and accountability. It does not require you to shrink yourself, silence your discomfort, or endure treatment that leaves you emotionally depleted. Healthy love acknowledges needs on both sides. It gives you space to express pain without being dismissed. It allows you to say no without fear. It creates an environment where your worth is not measured by what you provide, but by who you are as a person. Betrayal pushes you to confront whether your relationships reflect this kind of love, or whether you have been accepting a version of love that diminishes you. Often, the journey of reclaiming personal power after betrayal includes grief. Grief for the relationship you thought you had, grief for the expectation of closeness you believed was guaranteed, and grief for the version of yourself who tolerated pain to hold the relationship together. This grief is essential. It clears space for growth. It allows you to gently dismantle the illusions that kept you emotionally bound to someone who could not meet you with the same depth or respect. Grieving is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you are choosing truth over denial. As you move deeper into this healing process, you begin setting new boundaries, not out of spite, but out of wisdom. You learn what behaviors you will no longer tolerate. You learn to speak up earlier before resentment builds. You learn to prioritize emotional safety over keeping appearances. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors that open only to people who know how to enter respectfully. You realize that distancing yourself from those who hurt you is not abandonment, it is protection. It is preservation. It is self-love in action. Sometimes reclaiming power means stepping away from the relationship entirely, especially if the betrayal becomes a pattern. Other times it means redefining how you engage with the person, interacting in ways that do not compromise your dignity. And in some cases it opens the door for reconciliation, but reconciliation that is grounded in accountability and mutual growth, not guilt or pressure. True healing does not require hatred, it requires clarity. One of the most empowering shifts that occurs after betrayal is the transformation of your inner voice. You begin speaking to yourself with the compassion you once reserved only for others. You begin affirming your worth, acknowledging your feelings without judgment, and recognizing that you deserve the same care you eagerly offer to those you love. That shift becomes the foundation of your new emotional life, one where you no longer confuse loyalty with self-sacrifice or forgiveness with forgetting your own needs. Eventually, the betrayal that once felt like a wound becomes a lesson, a deeply painful one, but a transformative one. It teaches you that you can survive emotional rupture. It teaches you that your identity is not dependent on someone else's approval. It teaches you that boundaries are not a form of disconnection, but a form of self-preservation. It teaches you that reclaiming your power is not an act of rebellion, but an act of returning to yourself. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches you that you can love without losing yourself. If you want, I can expand the remaining keynotes or craft a complete motivational speech using all 4 themes.